Between 1347 and 1353, the Black Death claimed 25 million lives across Europe, wiping out up to 80% of the population in some cities. The plague was swift and merciless, but for those who survived, life continued in a radically transformed world. Here's what happened after the Black Death devastated Europe. Hey, quick thing before we start. If you actually listen to these regularly, hit like or subscribe. I always wonder where everyone's at, so comment your city and what time it is. Weird to think some of you are having breakfast in London while I'm recording this at night here in the States. Alright, let's head back to Europe in the aftermath of the Black Death. Trust me, it's going to be quite a ride. But first, get comfortable. Seriously. Adjust those pillows, pull up that blanket, because where we're going, you're going to want to be cozy. Your eyes open to darkness. The straw mattress beneath you is damp from the night's moisture that seeps through the walls of your small home. For a moment, everything feels normal. That familiar, scratchy texture against your skin, the smoky smell from last night's fire, the distant sound of a rooster. Then it hits you. The silence. No voices in the street. No clanging of the blacksmith's hammer. No children laughing or crying. Just nothing. You're probably wondering, wait, how unusual would this really be? Well, imagine your neighbourhood completely empty except for maybe every fifth house. That's what we're talking about here. You rise and step onto the packed dirt floor, cold against your bare feet. Not like your warm carpet or wood floors today. Medieval floors were usually just compressed earth, sometimes covered with rushes or straw that wouldn't be changed for months. Yeah, not exactly the pinnacle of hygiene, which didn't help with the whole plague situation. I spent way too long researching medieval sleeping arrangements for this. Turns out most people slept on simple straw mattresses, often with their whole family and even animals nearby for warmth. Privacy, not a concept they were familiar with, and these weren't memory foam mattresses. Just sacks stuffed with whatever was available. Straw, hay, sometimes wool if you were lucky. As you step outside, the morning sun illuminates a village transformed. The blood-red sunrise feels appropriate somehow. Down the lane where the baker's shop once filled the air with the smell of fresh bread, the door hangs open. No one has been there for weeks. The baker and his entire family gone. In your head, you're thinking, is anyone even left? The rational part of your brain knows there must be others, but the emotional part feels utterly alone in this moment. You make your way to the village centre. Before the plague, this would have been bustling with activity. Merchants setting up for the day, villagers drawing water from the well, church bells calling people to morning prayer. Now, the well sits untouched, the church door closed. The silence is broken only by the occasional bird or the wind rustling through empty market stalls. "Hello," you call out, your voice sounding foreign even to yourself. "Is anyone there?" There's a shuffle from a nearby house and an old woman appears, her face gaunt and suspicious. She's carrying a small bundle of herbs, rosemary, thyme, lavender, clutched tightly to her nose. "Stay back," she says, eyeing you cautiously. "You got the sickness?" The sickness. That's what many called it. Others called it the Great Mortality, the Pestilence, or the Great Plague. The term Black Death wasn't actually used until centuries later. "No," you reply, "my family," but you can't finish the sentence. She nods, understanding without words. Her bundle of herbs is what people believed would protect them from bad air, the miasma theory that disease spread through foul smells. So they carried sweet-smelling herbs, or flowers, to counteract it. Completely useless against the actual cause, bacteria carried by fleas on rats, but they didn't know that. "The priest is collecting the dead," she says flatly. "They're digging a pit outside the village, a mass grave." The normal burial customs had broken down completely. One Florentine chronicler wrote about how burial shrouds shot up to 10 times their normal price. and even then, there weren't enough people to dig individual graves. Bodies were piled in great pits, often with little or no ceremony. You follow the path she indicates, and over the rise you see them, a small group of figures, some digging, others dragging wrapped bodies. The smell hits you before you get close, that unmistakable sweet rot of decomposition. Stay with me here, because this is where it gets weird. The person in charge of this grim work isn't the priest as you'd expect, but a local butcher. The priest died 2 weeks ago. The butcher, with his experience handling dead flesh, has become the default undertaker. "We need hands," he calls when he sees you. Not hello or good morning, just a demand for labour. In a world where perhaps 2/3 of your community has vanished, every surviving pair of hands is precious. Picture this. By mid-1349, in places like Florence, Italy, so many people had died that the survivors couldn't keep up with the burial needs. They'd dump bodies in large trenches, layer them with a thin covering of soil, add another layer of bodies, more soil, and so on. Some of these mass graves have been discovered centuries later during construction projects, revealing the grim efficiency of plague-time burial practices. The next few hours blur as you help move the dead. These are people you knew, the miller's wife, the cooper's son, an entire family from the edge of the village. Their bodies are bloated and discoloured, many with the telltale black swellings in the armpits or groin that gave the plague one of its names, the pestilential buboes. Or last week, the butcher says as you pause to catch your breath, a man from the next village came looking for food, said there wasn't a single living soul left there, everyone dead or fled. Imagine that reality for a second. Entire villages just gone. Archaeological evidence has confirmed this happened. We've found abandoned medieval villages where excavations suggest sudden abandonment during the plague years. By midday, your stomach is growling. You realise you haven't eaten since yesterday. With the baker dead, where will bread come from? With so many farmers dead, who will harvest the crops? This is where the first major economic shift began. Food prices skyrocketed immediately after the plague hit a region. According to that Florentine chronicler I mentioned, the food suitable for the sick, cakes and sugar, reached outrageous prices. Chicken and other poultry were unbelievably expensive. You make your way to what once was the marketplace, hoping to find someone selling something, anything edible. There's a single vendor there, an old man with a cart containing a few withered vegetables and a small sack of grain. Around him, a handful of survivors argue over the prices. 6 pennies for a loaf? A woman shouts. That's robbery. Take it or starve, the vendor replies coldly. There's no one left to work the fields. He's not wrong. Farms lay abandoned, crops rotting in the ground. Farmers had died or fled, leaving the fields untended. Domestic animals wandered freely with no one to care for them. In some places, sheep and cattle died in the fields because there was no one to herd them. Okay, picture this. You're standing there watching people argue over the last scraps of food when suddenly the church bell rings. Everyone freezes. This isn't the normal call to prayer. It's erratic, desperate. You all rush toward the church where a lone survivor is pulling frantically on the bell rope. Riders, he shouts, coming from the east. Fear ripples through the small gathering. Riders could mean many things, none of them good. Bandits taking advantage of weakened villages. Officials coming to collect taxes despite the devastation. Or worse, people fleeing from another plague outbreak, potentially bringing the disease back to your village. The small crowd debates what to do. Some want to hide, others to stand their ground. In your head, you're screaming, "This is how I die, either by bandits or by plague." But before a decision can be made, the riders appear at the village edge. It's the Lord's son, returned from a nearby town with several armed men and a wagon of supplies. His father, the local lord, died of the plague months ago. "I've brought grain," he announces, his voice carrying across the square, "and I need workers for the fields. I'll pay double the usual wage." This moment right here, this is history pivoting. See, before the Black Death, peasants were essentially bound to the land, working for whatever the Lord decided to give them, which wasn't much. But with so many dead, the surviving workers suddenly had leverage. Labour shortages meant that workers could demand higher wages and better conditions. The young lord continues, "I need 10 strong people to prepare the fields for planting, 10 pennies a day each." A murmur runs through the crowd. 10 pennies is an unheard of wage. Before the plague, you might have earned 2 pennies for a full day of backbreaking labour. "And what of our own lands?" someone calls out. "We have fields too, if we could get seed." The Lord hesitates, calculating. "Work my fields first, and I'll ensure you have seed for your own." There's a collective hesitation. The old order would have demanded immediate obedience, but the world has changed. Finally, a few step forward, agreeing to the terms. Others hold back, suspicious of promises. And this negotiation, this wasn't something that would have happened before. The massive death toll had disrupted the entire social hierarchy. As one chronicler observed after the plague, once the plague had finished, anybody who could get a hold of whatsoever kind of cloth or found the raw materials to make it became rich. Similarly, survivors inherited goods and wealth from their deceased family members. A person who previously had nothing could suddenly find themselves quite rich. You spend the afternoon helping distribute grain from the Lord's wagon. As the sun begins to set, you return to your empty home. The silence still unnerves you, but there's something else now, a strange sense of possibility. What was once your parents' home is now yours. The tools your father crafted are now yours to use or sell. The small plot of land, while not much, is still more than you ever expected to own. As you light a small fire in the hearth, you consider the day. 24 hours ago, you were overwhelmed by grief and shock. Now, there's still grief that won't fade for years, maybe never, but there's also something unexpected, opportunity. Because here's the twist. While the Black Death was unquestionably one of the worst disasters in human history, killing millions and leaving survivors traumatized, it also accidentally created opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Land became available. Wages increased. Social mobility became possible in a way it hadn't been before. This isn't to say things were suddenly great. They weren't. The psychological toll was immense. Petrarch, an Italian poet who lived through the plague, wrote to his brother, "I would, my brother, that I had never been born, or at least had died before these times." He doubted that people of the future, that's us, could possibly understand their suffering. You lie back on your straw mattress, so different from your comfortable bed today. The emptiness of the house presses in on you. Before the plague, you would have been crowded in with parents, siblings, maybe grandparents or other relatives. Now it's just you. As you drift towards sleep, you wonder what tomorrow will bring in this new, emptier world. Will more survivors emerge from hiding? Will the crops be planted in time? Will the plague return? Unlike your peaceful bedroom tonight, with its security and comfort, a medieval survivor of the Black Death would fall asleep each night with profound uncertainty about the future. Yet despite that uncertainty, life would continue, and as we'll see tomorrow, the social fabric of Europe wouldn't just recover, it would transform completely. The grief and horror of mass death would gradually give way to something unexpected, a social revolution that would help pave the way for the modern world. But that's a story for another part of our journey. The second morning after the plague feels different. There's a strange energy in the air. Not hope exactly, but something shifting. You step outside to see a few more people in the village square than yesterday. Some faces you recognise, others are strangers who've wandered in from neighbouring settlements where they were the only survivors. The Lord's Son is organising workers for the fields, still offering those unheard of wages. But today, something unexpected is happening. A well-dressed man you've never seen before is arguing with him, loudly. "This is my land now," the stranger insists, waving a piece of parchment. "My cousin died with no heirs. I have the legal right." The Lord's Son looks ready to draw his sword. "Your cousin was my father's tenant. This land belongs to my family." And here we see another weird side effect of the plague. Property disputes were absolutely everywhere. When people died without clear heirs, distant relatives showed up making claims. Court records from the years after the plague are packed with inheritance cases. Imagine a family tree being pruned so severely that branches that never expected to inherit anything suddenly had legal claims. A crowd gathers to watch the argument. Next to you, an old farmer spits on the ground. Let them fight over it. Meanwhile, who plants the crops? We'll all starve by winter. He's not wrong. While the nobility and emerging merchant class fought over who owned what, practical matters, like food production, hung in the balance. You can inherit all the land in England, but if nobody's growing food, what good is it? "You worked for the old lord, right?" asks a woman beside you, a child clutching her skirt. "Will you work the fields again?" You hesitate. Before the plague, you'd have had no choice. But now there are options. 10 pennies is good wage, you say, testing the waters. "The tanner in the next village is offering 12, she replies casually, "for anyone who can help him process hides. He lost both his apprentices." Okay, freeze this moment right here. This conversation, this casual mention of shopping around for better wages, this was revolutionary. Before the plague, most peasants were tied to the land through serfdom or other obligations. The idea of just picking up and going somewhere for better pay? Unthinkable for most. But the massive labour shortage changed everything. Meanwhile, the Lord and the newcomer are still arguing. The Lord's Son finally shouts, "We'll take this to the King's court." The stranger laughs. The King's court, half the judges are dead, and the other half have fled London. Who's going to hear your case? He's got a point. The legal system, like everything else, had collapsed in many areas. Records from this period show court sessions cancelled, delayed for months or years, or conducted with whoever happened to be available rather than proper officials. You decide to follow the woman with the child, curious about this tanner offering higher wages. As you walk through the village, you notice something odd. Doors standing open on several houses. People are just taking what they need, the woman explains, following your gaze. No one left to claim it. Inside one abandoned home, you glimpse someone filling a sack with cooking pots, tools, clothing. Not stealing exactly, more like redistributing. Who was left to say who owned what? This massive wealth redistribution wasn't just happening with small items. In Florence, one chronicler recalled, once the plague had finished, anybody who could get a hold of whatsoever kind of cloth or found the raw materials to make it became rich. Similarly, survivors inherited goods and wealth from their deceased family members. A person who previously had nothing could suddenly find themselves quite rich. The woman leads you to a crossroads where a small group has gathered around a makeshift market, just a few blankets spread with goods. But these aren't normal market goods. There are silver cups, fine linen, tools, jewellery, things that would have been far beyond your reach before. Where did all this come from, you ask, though you already know. The dead don't need silver, says the man sitting cross-legged behind the display. He's missing 2 fingers and has the rough hands of someone who worked the fields his whole life. Found a whole chest of this stuff in my master's house after everyone there died. Figured I'd trade it for things I can actually use. You reach out to touch a silver goblet, then hesitate. It feels wrong somehow, profiting from so much death. The peasant notices your hesitation. "Oh, look," he says flatly, "my whole family's gone. Took them all in 3 days. You think I wanted this cup instead? But here we are. Might as well make use of what's left. I've studied accounts from plague survivors, and this practical approach was common. Not because people were heartless, but because the sheer scale of death made prolonged mourning almost impossible. Society had to continue functioning. You trade a small knife you've carried for years for a wool blanket that would have cost you a month's wages before. As you fold it, the woman touches your arm. The tanner's this way," she says, nodding down a path, "if you're interested." The tan yard sits at the edge of a neighbouring village, the sharp smell of urine, lime and animal hides hitting you long before you see it. Tanning was one of those necessary but deeply unpleasant medieval trades that nobody wanted to live near. The process used urine and animal brains to prepare hides. Yeah, really appetizing, I know. The tanner himself is a burly man with forearms like tree trunks. He looks up from scraping a hide as you approach. "You here to work?" he asks without preamble. "Maybe," you reply cautiously. "Heard you're paying 12 pennies. 15 now," he says. "Lost another worker yesterday, not to the plague. He just took off with some silver he found in an abandoned house, going to try his luck in London." The tanner spits. "Fool, city's got hit worse than anywhere." And he was right about that. Urban centres, with their crowded conditions, suffered death rates sometimes exceeding 50–60% of the population. In contrast, some isolated rural areas lost only a third of their people. Cold comfort, but it meant different recovery patterns. "Never tanned before," you admit. The tanner shrugs. "Can you follow instructions? Not afraid of mess? That's all I need. I can teach the rest." Before you can answer, there's a commotion from the village centre. Bells ringing, shouts. You and the tanner exchange glances and hurry toward the sound. A rider on a lathered horse has arrived, bringing news from the nearest large town. A crowd gathers as he gulps water from a proffered cup. "The bishop's declared all debts to the church forgiven," the messenger announces. "Says it's God's mercy for survivors." Murmurs run through the crowd. Church forgiveness of debts was a big deal. Many peasants were perpetually in debt to religious institutions that owned vast tracts of land. "What of the king's taxes?" someone calls out. The rider laughs, a harsh sound. "King's collectors tried to enter 3 villages. 2 were driven off with pitchforks. The 3rd hasn't been seen since." This was real, by the way. Tax collection broke down completely in many areas. Some collectors were attacked, others simply found ghost towns with no one left to tax. Records show royal revenues plummeted. "And the guilds in town?" asks an older man, likely a craftsman. "Are they taking new members?" Before the plague, craft guilds, organisations controlling trades like baking, metalworking or weaving, were notoriously exclusive. They limited membership to protect their monopolies and keep prices high. "The Weavers' Guild is taking anyone who can thread a loom," the messenger replies. "Half their members are dead, and they have orders backed up from before the sickness." It's hard to overstate how significant this was. Guilds that once required 7-year apprenticeships and family connections were suddenly desperate for anyone with basic skills. Social mobility that would have been impossible before was now there for the taking. You look back at the tanner, considering his offer. 15 pennies a day is more than you would have earned in 2 weeks of field work before. But the smell, the mess. Tell you what, the tanner says, reading your expression. Try it for 3 days. If you hate it, I'll pay you for the time and no hard feelings. As you hesitate, a woman elbows her way through the crowd, heading straight for the tanner. Master Fuller, she says, I've come about the work. The tanner looks surprised. You? But you're a woman? Yes, she interrupts. And my husband was your best worker before he died. I helped him for years. I know the process as well as any man. Okay, so here's another massive social shift happening. Women entering trades that were previously male-dominated. With labour so scarce, gender barriers started crumbling in certain industries. Not everywhere, not completely, but enough that women found opportunities that would have been unthinkable before. The tanner scratches his chin. Ever actually done the heavy scraping? The lifting? I've given birth to 4 children, she replies dryly. I can handle lifting a hide. A few people in the crowd chuckle. The tanner shrugs. 15 pennies, same as anyone else. 20, she counters. The crowd goes silent. A woman negotiating wages like this? Unheard of. The tanner barks a laugh. 18 and not a penny more. And you train this one too. He jerks a thumb at you. Done, she says without hesitation. And just like that, you've become an apprentice tanner with a woman as your teacher, being paid more than skilled craftsmen made before the plague. The old world truly was gone. As the crowd disperses, the messenger continues sharing news. Towns are offering citizenship to any skilled worker who will settle there. Landlords are reducing rents to keep tenants. Merchants who once dealt only in luxury goods for the wealthy are now selling to anyone with coin. You follow your new mentor back to the tannery, trying to ignore the smell that will soon become your daily reality. I'm Agnes, she says over her shoulder. Why tanning, you ask? You could probably do something less foul. Agnes slows to walk beside you. My husband didn't die of the plague, she says quietly. 2 years ago, a cart crushed him, left me with 4 children and no income, begged the tanner to let me work. He refused, said it wasn't woman's work. I took in washing instead, barely keeping us fed. She smiles grimly. And now he needs me more than I need him. Funny how things change. This reveals another side of the post-plague economy. People who had been marginalised before, women, lower-class workers, even the disabled in some cases, suddenly found their skills valued, not out of charity or social progress, but out of sheer necessity. At the tannery, Agnes doesn't waste time. She throws you a stained apron and points to a pile of raw hides. First step, scrape off all the flesh and fat, she demonstrates with a curved knife. Too much left on, the hide rots. Too much taken off, the leather's weak. The work is disgusting. Within an hour, you're covered in animal bits. Your arms ache, and the smell has penetrated everything. But there's something strangely satisfying about the transformation, taking a raw, bloody hide and beginning its conversion into something useful. By midday, your stomach is growling despite the stench. Agnes calls a break, and you both rinse your hands in a bucket before sharing a simple meal of bread and cheese that the tanner provides. He never fed workers before, Agnes comments, seeing your surprise. Food costs are up 3-fold, and he knows we could walk away and find work elsewhere by sunset. This was part of the new reality. Employers had to offer not just higher wages, but better conditions to attract and keep workers. Some Italian cities even passed laws limiting how luxuriously workers could be treated, trying to prevent employer competition from driving up costs too much. "Where are you sleeping?" Agnes asks as you eat. You realise you haven't thought about it. Your family home is in the next village over. Walking back and forth each day would be possible but tiring. He has a shed out back. Agnes nods toward a small structure. 2 workers used to share it. Now it's empty, not much, but it's shelter. After lunch, she shows you the next steps in the process, soaking the scraped hides in a mixture of water, lime, and urine. Yes, actual human urine collected in vats. Medieval tanning was not for the squeamish. "Everyone contributes," Agnes says with a straight face, pointing to a bucket in the corner of the shed. By evening, your body aches from unfamiliar labour, and you reek so badly you doubt you'll ever smell normal again. But as the tanner counts out your first day's wages, 18 small silver coins that glint in the fading light, you feel something unexpected: independence. Before the plague, your path would have been set. You'd have worked the same fields as your parents and grandparents, handed most of your harvest to the Lord, and lived or starved by forces beyond your control. Now, with those coins heavy in your palm, you have choices. You think of the silver goblet at the makeshift market. With a week's wages, you could buy such treasures for yourself. But then what? You can't eat silver, can't warm yourself with it. Instead, you walk back to the market as dusk falls and trade one of your precious coins for a thick candle, a small loaf of bread, and a piece of hard cheese. Practical things, survival things. In your borrowed shed that night, by candlelight, you eat better than you would have on a normal day before the plague. Tomorrow, you'll earn more coins, maybe save them, maybe trade for tools or clothes. The future is uncertain, but for perhaps the first time, it feels like your choice to make. As you drift towards sleep on a pile of straw that doesn't feel so different from your mattress back home, you realise something. In this strange new world where death has taken so much, it has also perversely given something back, a measure of freedom. Unlike your comfortable bedroom tonight with its security and predictability, medieval survivors like you faced a world where all the old rules had suddenly changed. Terrifying, yes, but also filled with possibilities that would have been unimaginable just months before. And as the social fabric continued to unravel and reknit itself in the coming months, those possibilities would only multiply, bringing both opportunity and conflict as Europe stumbled toward a new normal in the plague's devastating wake. 3 months into your new life as a tanner's apprentice, and the stink doesn't even bother you anymore. Agnes says that's how she knows you've become one of them. When you stop noticing the smell, everyone else still gives you a wide berth when you walk through the village though. "It's better than perfume these days," Agnes jokes as you both scrape hides under the summer sun. "Nobody wants to get close enough to give you the plague." She's not entirely wrong. People have developed strange ideas about how the disease spreads. Some believe it travels through bad smells, the miasma theory, while others are convinced it's carried in looks or breath. The stench of the tannery might be repulsive, but at least it keeps people at a distance. The tannery has been busy. With so many people dead, there are more cattle per survivor, which means more hides to process. Your hands have grown calloused, your arms stronger, and your coin purse heavier. "Master Fuller," calls a voice from the road. A well-dressed man on horseback, clearly a merchant of some kind, approaches with a handkerchief held to his nose. The tanner straightens, wiping his hands on his apron. "I?" I need 50 good leather hides by month's end for saddles and harnesses, the king's requisitioned horses for his French campaign, and there's good money for those who can outfit them. 50? The tanner scratches his chin. That's a tall order. Got just 4 workers now. The merchant eyes you and Agnes. 4? You're counting the woman? Agnes straightens, knife in hand. I finished more hides last week than the 2 men combined. I've read accounts where women who stepped into traditionally male roles during the labour shortage faced exactly this kind of scepticism, but the economic reality eventually forced even the most traditional minds to adapt. The merchant looks doubtful, but turns back to Master Fuller. 50 hides, 6 shillings each. The tanner nearly chokes. 6? The price was 4 before the death. Take it or leave it. Every tanner for 20 miles is getting the same offer. After the merchant leaves, Master Fuller calls everyone together. 4 of you now. You, Agnes, a teenage boy who started last month, and a grey-haired man who'd been a farmer until his entire family died. We can do 50 hides in a month, the tanner says, but we'll need to work from sunrise to sunset. I'll pay you each 25 pennies a day. Agnes crosses her arms. 30. 28, he counters immediately. And Sundays off, adds the older man, for church. The tanner sighs. Fine, 28 pennies and Sundays free, but we start at dawn tomorrow. Once he walks away, Agnes nudges you. Before the plague, he'd have laughed at us for even suggesting higher wages. Now he bargains like we're equals. This was happening everywhere. A Suffolk landowner complained in his journal that workers become so rebellious that the master fears his servant more than the servant his master. Can you imagine how radical that shift must have felt to people who had lived their entire lives in a rigid hierarchy? By late summer of 1350, about 3 years after the plague first hit Europe, something remarkable was happening across the countryside. Peasants weren't just earning more, they were living better. You see it in your own life. With your wages, you've moved out of the shed into a small but solid cottage whose previous owners all died. You've bought a real bed with a stuffed mattress instead of sleeping on straw. Your meals include meat several times a week, something unheard of for common folk before. On your next free Sunday, you walk to the village church. The building seems too large now for the smaller congregation. The new priest, the 3rd since the plague, the first 2 having died, is a young man with a nervous manner. He was rushed through his training to fill the desperate shortage of clergy. Brothers and sisters, he begins, his voice cracking slightly. Let us pray for those still suffering from God's great punishment. An old woman near the front stands up. If it's God's punishment, why did he take my innocent grandchildren and not sinners like the tax collector or the Lord's bailiff? They survived without a mark. The priest stammers, God's ways are mysterious. Mysterious, another voice calls out. Was it mysterious how the Jews poisoned the wells to spread the disease? This awful rumour had spread across Europe, leading to horrific persecution of Jewish communities. In some places, entire Jewish populations were murdered by mobs looking for someone to blame. There is no evidence of well poisoning, the priest says, with surprising firmness. The Pope himself has said as much. Then why did the plague spread along trade routes? Someone else demands. It followed where people travelled. This observation was actually quite astute. The disease did indeed follow human movement patterns, though not because of deliberate poisoning, but because the rats and fleas carrying the bacteria travelled with human cargo. After the service, people linger in small groups outside the church. You overhear snippets of conversation. The miller's charging triple what he did before. Can't get decent cloth anymore. All the best weavers died. My cousin's gone to London, says a craftsman can name his price there. The world has turned upside down. Things that were once cheap are now expensive. Jobs that were once scorned are now sought after. People who once had no options now have choices. You spot Agnes talking with several women and join their circle. Telling him I won't marry unless I can keep my job at the tannery, Agnes is saying, and my own wages. And what did he say to that? Asks a younger woman, eyes wide. He agreed, Agnes laughs. Can you imagine? Before the death, he'd have just found another woman. Now, she shrugs. Men need wives more than wives need husbands these days. It wasn't just economic power shifting. Social relationships were changing too. With so many widows and widowers, new marriages were forming with different expectations. Women who had proven they could support themselves weren't so quick to give up that independence. As you walk back from church, you pass the manor house where the Lord's son, now the Lord himself since his father's death was confirmed, is overseeing renovations. The windows are being enlarged, glass is being installed, even the nobility is living differently now. A group of labourers sitting in the shade, taking a break from the construction, wave you over. "Tanner," one calls out. "Come tell Martin here what you're earning these days." You hesitate, then share your daily wage. The workers whistle appreciatively. "See," the first man says to his companion, "and he's just an apprentice. I told you we should ask for more." "The Lord will never agree," Martin replies. "Then we all walk off the job," shrugs the first man. "See how fast his fancy windows get finished then." This collective bargaining power was unprecedented. Before, a lord might have had troublemakers flogged or worse. Now, workers were organising in ways that would eventually lead to the famous uprisings, like the 1381 Peasants' Revolt. The following week brings something new to your life. A visitor from a large town 20 miles away. "Master Fuller," the visitor addresses the tanner. "I represent the Tanners' Guild of St. Alban. We've heard of your operation here." The tanner frowns. "What of it? You're producing leather without guild oversight, without standardised quality." "Been tanning 30 years, Master Fuller spits. "My leather's better than half your guild's." "Nevertheless," the visitor continues, "the guild requires all tanners to be members, or to cease operation." Agnes whispers to you, "Before the plague, they'd have shut him down without a second thought. Guilds controlled everything." Master Fuller laughs. "And if I tell you to go back to your guild and kiss my arse?" The visitor's face reddens. "The guild has authority. Half your guild is dead," the tanner interrupts, "and I hear the rest can't keep up with demand. You need me more than I need you." The visitor changes tactics. "Join the guild and we'll ensure no one undercuts your prices. We set the rates for all members." "And the membership fee?" "Or normally £5, the visitor says, "but given the circumstances, we could reduce it to 2. Master Fuller considers this. £1, and I keep my current workers without them needing guild approval. They haggle a while longer before reaching an agreement." After the visitor leaves, you ask, "Why join at all? You said yourself they need you more than you need them." "For now," the tanner nods. "But times change. Better to have a say in the guild than fight it forever. Besides," he grins, "now we can charge guild prices." By autumn of 1350, another change becomes apparent. People are obsessed with avoiding disease. New daily rituals have emerged that would have seemed strange before the plague. You see it when trading in the village market. People hold fragrant herbs to their noses while shopping. They avoid touching hands when exchanging coins. Many wear small pouches of sweet-smelling herbs around their necks. Plague amulets, they're called. "It keeps away the bad air," explains a woman selling these pouches. "Rosemary, mint, lavender, and wormwood. Wear it at all times." You've noticed Agnes wearing one, though she seems embarrassed when you point it out. can't hurt," she mutters. "My neighbour swears they work. Her whole street died except for those with the herbs." Of course, this was pure coincidence. The herbs did nothing against the real cause of plague. But in a world without modern medicine, people desperately grabbed onto anything that seemed to offer protection. Other new habits have emerged too. People boil water before drinking it. They burn the clothing of the dead instead of reusing it. They quarantine newcomers to the village for days before allowing them to mix freely. Some of these practices, though based on flawed understanding, accidentally did help reduce disease transmission. Boiling water kills many pathogens. Burning contaminated clothing eliminates flea habitats. Quarantine can prevent contagion spread. Through tragic trial and error, medieval people were developing public health measures that actually worked. One evening, as you're finishing work, you notice smoke rising from the edge of the village. Following it, you find a group burning a huge pile of straw mattresses and old clothing. "Winter cleaning," explains an older woman overseeing the burning, "getting rid of anything that might harbour the pestilence before the cold drives us all indoors." Another unintended benefit, destroying flea habitats before winter, when people would crowd together in enclosed spaces, sharing warmth and, unfortunately, parasites. As winter approaches, you realise how much your life has changed in a single year, from a field worker bound to the land to an apprentice in a trade, from sleeping on straw in a crowded family hut to having your own cottage with a real bed, from near starvation to regular meals with meat. But there's something else too, a newfound respect. People who once would have ignored you now negotiate with you. Your opinion matters, your skills have value. You are no longer just another pair of hands in the field, interchangeable and disposable. One cold November evening, you're sitting in the village alehouse, another luxury you can now afford, when the newly installed bailiff enters. Before the plague, the bailiff was the Lord's enforcer, often feared and resented. This one looks barely older than you, thrust into the role by necessity. He calls for attention. The Lord requires 3 men to repair the mill before winter sets in. 6 days' work, 30 pennies per day. A few months ago, that would have been an astronomical wage. Now there's little reaction from the alehouse patrons. 35, calls out a man by the fire, and ale provided. The bailiff looks like he wants to argue, but just nods tiredly. Fine, who will take the work? 3 men eventually volunteer, but only after extracting promises about the exact hours and conditions. The bailiff leaves, looking defeated. "Saw the old lord turn a man's bones to jelly for talking back like that," comments an older patron after the bailiff leaves. "Now they're practically begging us to work." Agnes, who has joined you for a drink, leans in. "It won't last," she says quietly. "The nobles and merchants, they're not going to accept this new order forever. They'll find a way to push us back down." She's more right than she knows. Even as you enjoy your new status and comfort, forces are already working to restore the old hierarchies. In England, the first labour laws freezing wages will be enacted in 1351. In France, similar attempts to control labour costs are being implemented. But for now, in this strange window between the plague's devastation and the elite's reassertion of control, ordinary people are experiencing something rare: leverage. Later that night, returning to your cottage, you notice how different the village looks, not just because of the empty houses or the fewer people, but because of the improvements. Homes that once were simple wooden structures are being rebuilt with stone foundations. Windows that once were just openings covered with shutters now have oiled paper or even glass. People are using their new wealth to live better. Inside your own home, you light a candle. Beeswax, not tallow, another small luxury you can now afford. The mattress on your bed is stuffed with wool rather than straw. A copper pot hangs by the fire instead of a clay one. These material improvements might seem small from our modern perspective, but they represented significant quality of life changes. Better housing meant warmer, drier living conditions. Better bedding meant better sleep and fewer parasites. Better cooking implements meant more nutritious food preparation. All these improvements added up to something significant. People were living longer, not dramatically longer. Medieval life was still harsh by our standards, but the survivors of the plague who managed to avoid subsequent outbreaks often lived healthier lives than their pre-plague ancestors, simply because they had access to better nutrition and living conditions. As you drift towards sleep, you reflect on the strange paradox of your time. A world devastated by death, yet offering more opportunity for the living than ever before. Your wool-stuffed mattress is nothing compared to your comfortable modern bed, but compared to the straw pile you slept on a year ago, it feels like luxury. The next day will bring new challenges and opportunities as society continues to transform around you. The old world is gone, swept away by the plague's devastation. What replaces it is still forming, still malleable, and for the first time, people like you have a say in shaping it. Spring has arrived, bringing with it a strange tension to the village. It's been nearly 2 years since the plague swept through, and life has settled into new patterns. You've become skilled at tanning, earning wages that would have been unimaginable before. Agnes is now officially the tanner's wife, though she insisted on keeping her position and her own earnings. But something's shifting. You feel it first in small ways. Whispers in the marketplace, nervous glances when wages are discussed. Then one morning, the village crier arrives with a proclamation. Hear ye, his voice carries across the village square. By order of our sovereign Lord King Edward, the following laws are now in effect throughout England. A crowd gathers quickly. Royal proclamations aren't common events in small villages. All labourers, craftsmen and servants, the crier continues, reading from a scroll, shall accept the same wages and terms as were paid in the year 1346. Before the great mortality, a murmur ripples through the crowd. 1346 wages, that's less than half what most people are earning now. Furthermore, the crier raises his voice over the growing noise. It shall be illegal for any able-bodied man or woman to refuse suitable work when offered. Those violating these laws shall be fined or imprisoned. The crowd erupts. Someone throws a turnip at the crier, who ducks and continues reading even louder. These laws are enacted for the common good, to prevent the realm from falling into ruin due to excessive wages and idle hands. What you're witnessing is the Statute of Labourers, enacted in 1351. It was a direct response by the ruling class to the economic changes we've been following. Landowners, nobles, and wealthy merchants were horrified by rising wages and workers' new mobility. This law was their attempt to turn back the clock to before the plague. As the crier finishes and hurries away, the village explodes in angry conversation. They can't enforce this, a carpenter declares. Who's going to make me work for half my worth? The king's sheriffs, you idiot, replies a woman clutching a basket, and they'll throw you in a cell if you refuse. Master Fuller pushes through the crowd toward you and Agnes. His face is thunderous. Back to the tannery, now. Once you're back at the workshop, away from prying ears, he paces in agitation. This is bad, very bad. You're not actually going to cut our wages, are you? Agnes asks directly. The tanner runs a hand through his thinning hair. Not if I can help it, but they've appointed enforcers in every county. They'll be checking guild records, questioning workers. So what do we do? You ask. He thinks for a moment. On paper, you'll be paid the old wage rates, but... He lowers his voice, though there's no one else around. I can provide your meals. A cart of firewood might appear by your cottage each week. A winter coat might be a gift, not payment. This kind of under-the-table compensation became common. Employers who valued their workers found ways around the wage freezes. Some provided housing, food, or goods in addition to the mandated lower wages. Others simply ignored the law when they could get away with it. But the authorities were serious about enforcement. 2 weeks later, you see that seriousness firsthand. The weekly market is interrupted by the arrival of the sheriff and 4 armed men. They drag a stonemason into the square and force him to his knees. This man, announces the sheriff, demanded 3 pennies per day for his labour on the church repairs, when the legal rate is 1.5. He has been found guilty of violating the statute of labourers. The crowd watches in uneasy silence as the sheriff continues. The penalty is 3 days in the stocks and a fine of 20 shillings. The mason is forced into the wooden stocks at the edge of the square, his head and hands locked into the uncomfortable restraints where he'll remain exposed to the elements and public humiliation. Let this be a warning, the sheriff calls out. The king's law will be enforced. That evening, under cover of darkness, villagers secretly bring water and food to the mason. One person even holds a cloak over him during a brief rainfall. Small acts of solidarity, but meaningful. When the sheriff's men aren't around, people discuss the situation openly. The nobles are terrified, explains an old merchant who travels between villages. They've lived their whole lives with peasants under their thumb. Now that we have some leverage, they're using the king's power to crush us. Can they really turn everything back to how it was before? Someone asks. The merchant snorts. They can try, but there are fewer workers now, and that's a fact they can't change with any law. He's right. The fundamental economic reality, a drastically reduced workforce, couldn't be erased by legislation, but the ruling class had centuries of experience maintaining control, and they were using every tool at their disposal. A month after the proclamation, the tanner calls everyone together again. The guild has been ordered to keep detailed records of all workers and their wages, he explains grimly. Inspections will be random. Anyone found receiving extra compensation will be fined, along with their employer. So our arrangement, you begin, has to stop, he finishes, looking genuinely regretful. They're watching too closely now. Just like that, your income is cut in half. The comfortable life you've built begins to crumble at the edges. The small luxuries go first. No more meat with every meal, no more fine candles. Then larger sacrifices follow. You have to give up the cottage you were renting and move back to the tanner's shed to save money. You're not alone in these reversals. Across the village, people who had begun to improve their circumstances find themselves pushed back down. The brief window of opportunity seems to be closing, but humans are remarkably adaptable, especially when motivated by self-interest. New forms of resistance emerge. Need a hand with that garden? Asks a farmer's widow one evening as you're struggling to dig a small plot behind the tannery shed. I can't pay you, you admit. Didn't offer it for coin, she replies, but I've got more turnips than I can eat, and that leather vest you're making looks about my size. Bartering becomes the new currency, direct exchanges of goods and services that bypass the regulated wage system. It's technically against the spirit of the law, but harder to track and punish than straightforward wage violations. Other forms of resistance are less subtle. Work slowdowns become common. If you're being paid half what you're worth, why work at full speed? Taking your time with those hides, Agnes observes one afternoon as you methodically scrape at a pace that would have earned you a scolding months ago. Worth half the pay, half the effort, you reply. She glances around to ensure no one's listening. Just be careful, the master's under pressure from the guild. They've started finding workshops that don't meet quotas. This pressure creates tension between workers and employers, both of whom are caught in a system neither created Master Fuller, once reasonably fair in his dealings, grows snappish and demanding as guild expectations increase while his workforce's motivation decreases. "I could have you replaced," he threatens after finding you taking an unauthorized break. "With who?" you challenge, knowing that even with reduced wages, workers are still scarce. Good luck finding someone who knows how to prepare the lime pits properly. It's a dangerous game of chicken. You need the work, however poorly paid. He needs your skills, which would take months to replace. Neither can afford to break completely with the other. The situation in cities is even more volatile. When a travelling peddler visits the village, he brings news from London. The guilds there have hired thugs to intimidate workers, he tells the crowd at the alehouse. Anyone suspected of accepting higher than legal wages gets a midnight visit. Men have been beaten, workshops vandalised. "And how are people responding?" someone asks. The peddler leans in. Workers are organising too. Secret meetings, codes to identify each other. Some talk of revolt, though that's dangerous talk. He taps his nose meaningfully. The walls have ears these days. Indeed, another development of this period was the rise of informants. Authorities offered rewards for reporting wage violations or worker organisations. Neighbours informed on neighbours, creating an atmosphere of suspicion. One morning, you arrive at the tannery to find Agnes looking pale and worried. "Martin was arrested last night," she says quietly. Martin, the older man who worked alongside you, had become something of a mentor. "What for?" you ask, though you can guess. "Sheriff said he was organising workers, planning to demand higher wages again." She rubs her arms nervously. "They said he'll be made an example." 2 days later, that example is made public. Martin is brought to the village square, his hands bound. The sheriff reads the charges: incitement, conspiracy to violate the labour statutes, insubordination. The punishment is severe: public branding on the face with an F for false, meaning oathbreaker, followed by imprisonment. As they heat the branding iron, the crowd grows restless. There are mutterings, angry glances. For a moment it seems like they might intervene. The sheriff senses it too and calls his men into a tighter formation around the prisoner. The tension builds until one of the wealthier villagers, a merchant who's benefited from lower wages for his workers, steps forward. "If I pay his fine, will you spare the brand and jail?" he offers. The sheriff considers, then nods curtly. Money changes hands, and Martin is released with just a warning. The crowd disperses, crisis averted for the moment. Later, you ask the merchant why he intervened. "Don't mistake me for some champion of workers," he replies frankly, "but a branded imprisoned man produces nothing and buys nothing. Bad for business, and a riot would be even worse." It's a coldly practical answer, but it illustrates something important. The economy still needed to function. Even with the restrictive laws, there was a limit to how far authorities could push before the system itself would break down. This uneasy balance continued through 1351 and 1352. The laws remained, the punishments were real, but on the ground, 1,000 small compromises and adjustments allowed life to continue. Some workers simply moved to areas with less stringent enforcement. You consider this option yourself after hearing that coastal towns are paying double the legal rate for skilled workers, the local authorities turning a blind eye out of practical necessity. "I could go to Bristol," you mentioned to Agnes one day. "Start fresh where no one's watching so closely." "And be a stranger with no connections when the next plague outbreak comes," she counters. "At least here we have a community, people who'll help each other." She has a point. Despite the economic repression, social bonds have strengthened among survivors. People who lived through the horror of the plague together share a connection that newcomers wouldn't have. By late 1352, 5 years after the plague first appeared in Europe, a peculiar new normal has established itself. On paper, the old hierarchies are reasserted. In practice, a complex web of workarounds and resistance keeps workers from slipping back to their pre-plague status. You see it at the Christmas feast in the village church. The new priest, the nervous young man, has been replaced yet again, leads prayers before the community meal. Looking around, you note how the seating arrangement has subtly changed from years past. Before the plague, the noble family would have been separate, elevated. Craftsmen and peasants would have known their places, rigidly defined. Now, while there's still a hierarchy, the boundaries are blurrier. The Lord's son turned Lord sits only slightly apart. Conversations flow more freely between ranks. Everyone has lost someone. Everyone has had to adapt. The food, too, tells a story. Despite the wage restrictions, ordinary people are eating better than they did before the plague. There's more meat, more varied dishes. With fewer mouths to feed and the same amount of agricultural land, food production per person has actually increased. After the meal, an impromptu dance begins. You find yourself partnered with a merchant's daughter, something that would have raised eyebrows before. As you move through the steps of a circle dance, you catch snippets of conversations from around the room. Thinking of appealing to the King's Court? Can't find anyone willing to thatch the roof for the legal wage. Sheriff's been taking bribes to look the other way. Heard there's good land available up north. Each comment reflects the ongoing negotiation between the law as written and reality as lived. The statute of labourers hasn't failed entirely. Wages have indeed fallen from their immediate post-plague highs, but neither has it fully succeeded in restoring the pre-plague order. As the night winds down, you walk back to your shed with a full stomach and conflicted thoughts. Your life is harder than it was a year ago, when wages were at their peak, yet it's still better than it would have been if the plague had never happened. The stars above are brilliant in the winter sky, the same stars that shone down on this land long before the plague and will continue long after everyone now living is gone. From that vast perspective, even the catastrophe of the Black Death is just a moment in time. Terrible, transformative, but ultimately just one chapter in humanity's long story. And that's a comforting thought as you settle onto your straw mattress, so different from your soft bed today. Despite all attempts to freeze time and preserve old power structures, change continues, sometimes visibly in proclamations and punishments, sometimes invisibly in 1,000 small acts of negotiation and resistance. Tomorrow, you'll return to the tannery. You'll work for less than you're worth, but more than your father ever earned. You'll navigate the complex new reality, finding paths between compliance and defiance. You'll survive as humans always have by adapting. And unlike the comfortable certainty of your modern life, medieval survivors lived with daily reminders that nothing was guaranteed. Not health, not status, not even the social order itself. The plague had revealed how quickly everything could change, a lesson none of them would ever forget. 10 years have passed since you first became a tanner's apprentice. You're now a respected craftsman in your own right, having taken over the workshop 3 years ago when Master Fuller died of a winter fever. Agnes still works alongside you, though she's teaching her eldest daughter the trade now too. The world has changed in subtle ways. The initial shock of the plague has faded into memory, though no one who lived through it will ever forget. The desperate labour shortages have eased somewhat as children born after the plague have grown old enough to work. Wages have stabilised at a level lower than the post-plague peak, but still higher than before the pestilence. And something else has changed too. The way people think about disease. You notice it first when news comes that plague has reappeared in a town 30 miles away. Before, such news would have caused panic, with people fleeing in all directions, ironically helping to spread the disease further. This time, the reaction is different. The town council has sealed the gates, explains a merchant who managed to leave just before the quarantine. No one in, no one out, until the pestilence has passed. The whole town? Someone asks. Even the healthy? Everyone, the merchant confirms. They've arranged for food to be left outside the walls, no direct contact with outsiders. This is new. During the first plague outbreak, people fled infected areas, spreading the disease wherever they went. Now, communities are learning to isolate themselves when disease appears. They didn't understand exactly why it worked, but they observed that it did. Your village headman calls a meeting to discuss preparations should the plague reach you. The atmosphere is remarkably calm, not because people aren't afraid, but because they now have strategies beyond prayer and flight. We should appoint plague wardens, suggests the miller, to check for signs of sickness in each household. Others nod in agreement. The idea of designated officials monitoring public health was taking root across Europe. Venice had established a permanent health magistracy, what they called a health office, to oversee sanitation and monitor diseases. And we'll need a place to isolate the sick, adds Agnes, away from the village centre. They settle on an abandoned barn at the edge of the village, which will be cleaned and prepared as a pest house, a place where the infected can be kept separate from the healthy. As the meeting breaks up, the local priest approaches you. "I need leather," he says, without preamble. "Fifth tea. Is enough for a full body covering." "What for?" you ask, curious. "Protection," he replies. "I've heard of a physician in France who treats plague victims while covered from head to toe in leather, with a mask like a bird's beak filled with aromatic herbs. He believes it keeps the poisonous air at bay." What he's describing is the early version of what would become the iconic plague doctor costume: a leather or waxed canvas coat, gloves, boots, hat and a mask with glass eye openings and a beak-like protrusion filled with herbs and spices. While designed based on the flawed miasma theory, the idea that disease spread through bad air, the covering actually did provide some protection against flea bites, which were the real disease vector. You agree to provide the leather, curious to see this strange outfit. When it's completed a week later, the effect is both comical and terrifying. The priest looks like some strange Birdman hybrid, but the purpose is deadly serious. "If the plague comes," he explains, showing how the eye holes are covered with glass, "I can minister to the sick without falling ill myself." Word of the costume spreads, and soon others are requesting similar protective gear. You find yourself developing an unexpected specialty in medical protective wear, adapting designs based on feedback from users. This kind of practical innovation was happening across Europe, with universities having lost up to 2/3 of their physicians during the plague. Medical knowledge was becoming less theoretical and more experimental. People tried different approaches, noted what worked, and shared that knowledge. When summer arrives, bringing hot weather and worries about disease, your village implements another new practice: warning systems for infected houses. Each home with illness must mark their door with a white cloth, announces the headman. No one enters or leaves except the plague wardens and priest. This system of marking infected households became common across Europe. In some places, they used red crosses painted on doors or posted guards outside plague houses. The goal was the same: containment through isolation. But the most significant development comes from Venice, brought to you by an Italian leather merchant. They've built a special facility on an island in the lagoon, he tells you as you negotiate over a shipment of tanning supplies. Any ship with suspected illness aboard must anchor there for 40 days before entering the city. 40 days? You're skeptical. That seems excessive. Caranagione, he says with a shrug. 40 days. Long enough to be sure no hidden sickness will emerge. They call it quarantine. This was indeed the birth of modern quarantine, the word itself coming from the Italian for 40 days. The practice began in the Venetian-controlled port of Ragusa, modern Dubrovnik, in 1377, then spread to Venice and other Mediterranean ports. Does it work, you ask? Venice has avoided major plague outbreaks since they implemented it, the merchant replies, while other cities have suffered terribly. The concept soon extends beyond ports. When a messenger arrives from a neighbouring village where illness has appeared, he's not allowed past the village boundary. Instead, he must leave his messages in a bucket of vinegar at a designated spot where they're retrieved only after soaking for hours. Vinegar was believed to purify objects contaminated by plague, and surprisingly, there was some merit to this. The acid in vinegar can kill certain bacteria, though not the plague bacterium itself. Still, the practice of disinfecting potentially contaminated items was a step toward modern sanitation. By 1365, almost 20 years after the first plague outbreak, medical knowledge has evolved significantly. No one yet understands the true cause, bacteria carried by fleas on rats, but practical experience has led to effective preventative measures. You see this evolution in action when a travelling physician visits your village. Unlike the university-trained doctors before the plague, who relied heavily on ancient texts by Galen and other classical authorities, this new breed of healer emphasises observation and results. "I don't bleed my patients," he announces, contradicting centuries of medical practice. "I've observed that those who are bled during plague sicken and die faster than those left alone." This kind of empirical approach, based on observation rather than authority, marked a significant shift in medical thinking. The catastrophic failure of traditional medicine during the Black Death had created space for new approaches. The physician shares other observations. Plague seems to strike less often in homes that are kept clean, with few rats and mice. I advise all households to keep cats and to store food in covered containers. Again, without understanding the exact mechanism, people were identifying practices that actually helped reduce disease transmission. Civil War soldiers were more likely to die from diarrhea than from bullets. No, really. The disease killed 44,000 Union soldiers. That's the equivalent of 10 entire Gettysburg battles, and that was just one of the many diseases they faced. Hey, quick thing before we start. If you actually listen to these regularly, hit like or subscribe. I always wonder where everyone's at, so comment your city and what time it is. Weird to think some of you are having breakfast in London while I'm recording this at night here in the States. Alright, tonight it's the American Civil War, but before we go anywhere, get comfortable. Like, actually comfortable. Pillows good? Blanket situation handled? Perfect. Trust me on this one. Your eyes open to early morning light filtering through canvas. April 1863, Union Army, somewhere in Pennsylvania. First thing you notice is the straw poking through your thin blanket, jabbing into your back like tiny daggers. The wool blanket you're wrapped in scratches your skin and smells like wet dog mixed with sweat, not like your plush mattress at home. What pulls you fully awake is the sound. A bugle blaring reveille, hundreds of men coughing, someone nearby groaning with stomach cramps. That's becoming a familiar sound in camp. Too familiar. Get up, Fletcher captain's coming through. You're Thomas Fletcher, 16 years old, though your enlistment papers say 18. You've been in the Union Army for exactly 3 weeks, and every morning you wake up wondering what the hell you were thinking. Back on your family's farm in western Pennsylvania, this time of morning meant feeding animals and helping Ma with breakfast. Now it means rushing to get dressed before the officers come through, trying to find clean water to wash your face, and praying your stomach doesn't betray you like it did yesterday. I swear to God, says your tent mate Wilkins, a factory worker from Philadelphia, if I have to dig another latrine today, I'm deserting. He doesn't mean it, not really, but the sentiment is there. The ground outside is mud. Not regular mud, this special kind of mud made by thousands of men living in close quarters with poor drainage. It's mixed with horse manure, human waste that didn't make it to the latrines, and whatever else has been discarded. And the smell? Jesus. I can't even describe it properly. It was bad. Like gag reflex bad. You'd probably need to breathe through your mouth. You know what's wild? 3 weeks ago, you were so excited to join. You'd heard Lincoln's call for volunteers, listened to the recruiter talk about glory and saving the Union, watched the town celebrate as you and 5 other boys signed up. Your ma cried, but your pa looked proud. Said you were doing what needed doing. Nobody told you about the mud, or the food, or the dysentery. Fletcher uniform inspection in 10 minutes. Get your ass moving. That's Sergeant Miller, former schoolteacher from Boston, seems to enjoy making your life miserable. You stumble out of your tent into the chaos of camp. 15,000 men all doing the same thing at once creates a special kind of madness. The camp stretches for miles, tents arranged in neat rows that somehow still look messy, campfires sending smoke into the morning air, men in various states of dress rushing about. Your stomach growls. Breakfast will be hardtack and salt pork, if you're lucky. Hardtack is basically a brick made of flour that could crack your teeth if you're not careful. Most guys soak it in coffee to soften it up. Problem is, sometimes that reveals the weevils living inside. Extra protein, the veterans joke. You're not laughing yet. Look alive, boys. It's Corporal Jenkins, looking way too chipper for this hour. Word is we're moving out tomorrow, heading south. The words send a jolt through you. South means closer to battle. You enlisted to fight, sure, but the reality of it is starting to sink in. They say Lee's army is on the move, Jenkins continues, lowering his voice like he's sharing state secrets. Could be the big one. William, the quiet farmer's son from Ohio who sleeps on your other side, looks up from lacing his boots. My pa says every battle is the big one until the next one comes along. Smart kid, William, barely older than you, but sometimes seems like he's carrying the wisdom of someone 3 times his age. His hands are permanently stained with dirt from the farm, much like yours. The morning routine is mind-numbing but necessary. Roll call, breakfast, drilling, more drilling, cleaning your rifle until you can see your reflection in the metal. You fired it exactly twice during training. Some of the boys had never held a gun before enlisting. You seen Johnson this morning? Asks Wilkins, chewing on hardtack that makes an audible crunch with each bite. Infirmary, says William quietly. Fever got worse in the night. A moment of silence falls between you. 3 men from your company have already died of disease, and you haven't even seen battle yet. The infirmary tent is a place of nightmares, men moaning in pain, the smell of infected wounds and body odour, harried doctors moving from cot to cot with barely a glance at each patient. After breakfast, which is a generous way of describing what you just ate, it's drill time. 2 hours of marching back and forth across a muddy field, practicing formations that supposedly matter in battle. Forward march, right face, about face, load in 9 times, present arms. Your drill instructor is a weather-beaten man named Corporal Haynes who fought in the Mexican War. His voice carries across the field like thunder. You call that a formation. My dead grandmother could make a straighter line again. The rifle is heavy. That's the thing nobody tells you. The Springfield Model 1861 weighs about 10 pounds, which doesn't sound like much until you're holding it at shoulder arms for an hour. Your muscles burn. Sweat trickles down your back despite the cool spring air. But Haynes keeps pushing. When you meet Johnny Reb on the battlefield, you'll thank me. Loading your rifle needs to be instinct. You hesitate, you die. You try not to think about the dying part. Mid-morning brings a different kind of drill, bayonet practice, charging at straw dummies tied to posts, stabbing and slashing with a foot-long blade attached to your rifle. The thought of driving this into another human being makes your stomach turn, but you push the feeling down. This is what you signed up for. Put your weight into it, Fletcher, Haynes barks. They won't just stand there and let you poke 'em. By noon, your uniform is soaked through with sweat and your hands are blistered. There's a brief respite for a meal that's nearly identical to breakfast, and then it's equipment inspection. The sergeant walks down the line, examining each soldier's kit. Rifle, bayonet, cartridge box, cat pouch, haversack, canteen, blanket, roll. Everything must be in place, clean as possible given the circumstances. Your rifle's filthy, Thompson, he says to the man next to you. Clean it again. When he reaches you, he pauses. Boots coming apart, Fletcher. See the quartermaster after this. You glance down. Sure enough, the sole of your right boot is separating from the upper. Great. The quartermaster is notoriously stingy with new equipment. Stitch it together, he'll probably say. We're not made of boots. After inspection comes fatigue duty, the Army's term for chores. Today, your squad is assigned to dig new latrines. The old ones are filling up fast and the smell is becoming unbearable even by camp standards. So you spend 2 hours digging trenches in the hard ground, taking turns with worn shovels. You know what my father told me before I left, says Wilkins, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. He said, son, in the army you'll see the best and worst of men. He didn't mention I'd be smelling the worst too. That gets a laugh from the group. Humour, however crude, is your collective shield against the reality of your situation. By late afternoon, your hands are raw and your back aches, but the new latrines are dug. You head to the creek that runs along the edge of camp to wash up. The water is cold and not particularly clean, too many men using it upstream, but it's better than nothing. As you're scrubbing dirt from your hands, William appears beside you. Letter call came while we were digging, he says, holding out an envelope. This one's for you. Your heart leaps. Mail from home is the most precious thing in camp. You dry your hands on your trousers and take the letter carefully. Your mother's handwriting. You'll save it for tonight, something to look forward to. Any for you? You ask William. He shakes his head. Not today. Dinner is beans and salt pork, with coffee so weak it's practically brown water, but you eat every bite. One thing the army has taught you, never skip a meal. You never know when the next one is coming. As the sun begins to set, an unusual excitement runs through the camp. A travelling photographer has arrived and set up his equipment near the officers' tents. For 25 cents, soldiers can have their portrait taken to send home. Should we do it? Wilkins asks, genuinely excited for the first time in days. You check your meagre funds. 25 cents is a lot, nearly half of what you have left from your last pay. But the thought of sending your portrait home to your mother, Let's do it, you decide. The line is long, but you wait patiently. When your turn comes, the photographer, a thin, nervous man with ink-stained fingers, positions you in front of a plain backdrop. Chin up. Look brave, he instructs. You try your best to look like a soldier, not a frightened farm boy. The flash powder ignites with a bright burst and acrid smoke. That's it. In 2 weeks, if you're lucky, your mother will receive a tintype of her son in uniform. As darkness falls, campfires flicker to life across the vast encampment. Your company gathers around one, the familiar faces illuminated by the dancing flames. Someone has a harmonica and plays a mournful rendition of Home Sweet Home that makes your chest tight with longing. Now feels like the right time to read your letter. You carefully open the envelope, preserving it for a reply. Your mother's words leap off the page. News of home, how your father's managing the farm without you, your sister's new baby, you're an uncle now. Questions about whether you're eating enough and staying warm. There's no mention of the war itself, as if by not acknowledging it, she can keep you safe. The letter ends with a pressed wildflower from the meadow behind your house. The sight of it nearly undoes you. Good news? Asks William, noticing your expression. I'm an uncle, you manage, carefully tucking the flower back into the envelope. Around the fire, men share bits of news from their own letters, creating a patchwork map of home across the northern states. Stories of harvests and church socials and town gossips feel like dispatches from another world, but the conversation inevitably turns to tomorrow's march, and what might lie beyond it. My cousin was at Bull Run, says Thompson, poking at the fire with a stick. Said it was pure chaos. Men running in every direction, couldn't tell friend from foe through the smoke. My brother fought at Shiloh, another soldier adds. Said the dead were so thick on the ground you couldn't walk without stepping on somebody. You listen silently, fear coiling in your stomach. These are the stories they don't print in newspapers, that recruiters don't tell wide-eyed boys signing their names. Enough of that talk, Jenkins interrupts. We'll face what comes when it comes. No use borrowing trouble. Wise words, but cold comfort as you return to your tent for the night. The canvas structure seems flimsy protection against what awaits you in the days ahead. You settle onto your bedroll, the straw crackling beneath you. Outside, the sounds of camp gradually quiet, the occasional laugh, a bout of coughing, the distant neigh of horses. Above the tent, through a small gap in the canvas, you can see stars dotting the night sky. The same stars shine over your family's farm, over the Confederate camps somewhere to the south, over a country tearing itself apart. Sleep comes fitfully, as it always does in camp. Your dreams are a confusion of home and war, familiar faces and nameless fears. Tomorrow, you march toward whatever waits beyond the horizon. What you don't know yet is that this relatively comfortable camp life, despite its hardships, will soon seem like luxury. The mud, the poor food, the endless drilling, all of it preparing you for something much worse. But for now, you sleep, rifle within arm's reach, surrounded by men who were strangers 3 weeks ago and now know your snoring patterns. In the morning, the bugle will wake you again and the next chapter of your war will begin. The bugle sounds before dawn, jerking you from what little sleep you manage to get. Outside your tent, the camp is already stirring, an anthill of activity as 15,000 men prepare to march. Rise and shine, princess, Wilkins says, already pulling on his boots. Today's the day we earn our glory. Or our coffins, William mutters, but only you hear him. Breakfast is hardtack and lukewarm coffee. You've learned to pound the hardtack into crumbs and mix it with coffee, creating a grey paste that's easier to swallow than trying to bite the rock-hard biscuit. Tastes like wet cardboard, but it fills the stomach. By first light, you're standing in formation with your company. The morning air is crisp, mist hanging low over the fields. Captain Hayes paces in front of the line, his boots polished despite the mud. He's young for a captain, maybe 25, with a neat moustache and eyes that have already seen too much. "Men," he says, voice carrying across the silent ranks. "We march south today to join the main army, 10 miles at least. Light packs, full canteens. Any man who falls out will answer to me personally. 10 miles doesn't sound too bad. Back home, you'd walk that far, just checking fences." But that was without a 10-pound rifle, 40 rounds of ammunition, a bayonet, canteen, haversack, and everything else the army deems necessary. The regiment moves out with surprising order, each company filing into place on the road. From your position you can see the column stretching ahead and behind, thousands of men in blue, a giant centipede winding through the countryside. The early sun glints off rifle barrels and brass buttons. Flags snap in the breeze. It would be beautiful if it wasn't terrifying. "You know what's crazy," Wilkins says, as you settle into the marching rhythm. "More people in this column than live in my entire hometown." He's right. It's hard to wrap your head around. All these men from farms and factories and shops across the Union, now moving as one massive organism toward whatever waits ahead. The first hour passes easily enough. The road is decent, spirits are high, and some men even sing as they march. John Brown's body echoes up and down the line. You join in at the chorus, feeling a part of something bigger than yourself. Then the road turns to mud. Recent rains have transformed the route into a brown soup that sucks at your boots with every step. What was a steady march becomes a slog. The singing dies away, replaced by curses and laboured breathing. Your pack straps dig into your shoulders. Each step requires extra effort to pull your foot from the mire. This, Wilkins pants beside you, is bullshit. 2 hours in, and the first men begin to fall out. Not many, mostly the obviously sick or elderly, but enough to notice the gaps forming in the column. An officer on horseback rides alongside, shouting encouragement that sounds more like threats. "Keep moving, any man stopping will face court-martial." By noon, your uniform is soaked with sweat despite the cool spring air. Your feet are screaming, blisters forming where your damp socks rub against poorly fitted boots. The column halts briefly beside a stream, officers allowing 15 minutes to refill canteens and relieve yourselves. You collapse on a patch of grass, legs trembling with fatigue. William sits beside you, face pale beneath a layer of road dust. Neither of you speaks, saving energy for what's ahead. Wilkins, somehow still energetic, drops down beside you and pulls off his boots. "First rule of marching," he says, inspecting his feet. "Take care of these, or you're finished." He produces a small tin of grease from his pocket and begins rubbing it on the raw spots. "Got this from an old Mex War veteran. Sheep fat mixed with beeswax. Stops the rubbing." He offers you the tin. The grease smells rancid, but you apply it gratefully to your own blistered heels. It's disgusting, but feels instantly better. "How far you reckon we've come?" William asks, accepting the tin next. Wilkins squints at the sun. 5-6 miles, maybe. Halfway there, if the captain was telling the truth. The thought isn't comforting. The 15-minute rest ends too quickly. Back on your feet, back in formation, back to putting one foot in front of the other. The road climbs now, winding up a gentle hill that feels like a mountain to your tired legs. As you crest the rise, something new appears ahead. Wagons, dozens of them coming toward the column. Ambulance wagons painted white with red crosses. The column parts to let them pass, and that's when you get your first real look at war. The wagons are packed with wounded men. Some sit upright, bandages around heads or arms, eyes vacant. Others lie flat, moaning with each bump in the road. The worst are ominously still, covered with blankets despite the warm afternoon. Jesus Christ, Wilkins whispers, his usual humour gone. A soldier in a blood-stained uniform sits at the edge of one wagon, missing an arm below the elbow. His remaining hand clutches a Bible. He makes eye contact with you as the wagon passes, and you see something in his expression that chills you. Not pain, but a strange distance, as if he's looking at you from across an unbridgeable chasm. The wagons keep coming. 10, 20, 30. How many men? Hundreds, at least, all headed north, away from wherever you're marching toward. That's the 12th Massachusetts, someone in the ranks says. They got hit bad at Chancellorsville. The name means nothing to you now, but soon it will join the growing lexicon of battle names that every soldier knows, places where men died in droves. The column marches on, but the mood has changed. The reality of what awaits has been made flesh in those broken bodies. Conversation dies away. Even the officers ride more quietly. By late afternoon, your world has narrowed to the few feet of road ahead and the endless cycle of placing one foot before the other. Your shoulders burn from the weight of your gear. Your throat is parched despite careful sips from your canteen. Hunger gnaws at your belly. When the order finally comes to make camp, it's like a reprieve from execution. The regiment files off the road into a large meadow, already filling with other units. Tents go up with practiced efficiency, despite exhausted hands. Fires flicker to life as darkness falls. You sit with your company, too tired to even complain, watching the coffee boil in the shared pot. Your feet throb inside your boots, but you're afraid to remove them, not sure you can get them back on over your swollen feet. 10 miles, the captain said. Wilkins groans, lying flat on his back. That was 15 if it was a step. 16, corrects a new voice. You look up to see a lean, weathered soldier standing at the edge of your firelight. He's older, 30 at least, with a sergeant's stripes and a cavalry trooper's unmistakable bow-legged stance. "Saw you boys coming in," he says, squatting down beside your fire. "First big march?" You nod, too tired for words. He chuckles. "Gets easier. Sort of." He extends a hand. "Sergeant Michael Reeves, 8th Pennsylvania Cavalry." "You been fighting long?" William asks after introductions. Reeves nods, accepting a cup of coffee from Wilkins. "Since 61. Bull Run, Peninsula Campaign, Antietam, Fredericksburg." He lists the battles like stops on a familiar road. "What's it like?" you hear yourself ask. "The fighting, I mean." Reeves studies you over the rim of his cup. His eyes are green, you notice, but somehow darker than any eyes you've seen. "Ain't like anything they tell you," he says finally. "Ain't glorious, ain't noble. It's loud and it's confusing and it's..." He pauses. "It's men trying to kill each other is what it is." He must see the fear in your faces because his expression softens slightly. "Look, you're in a good outfit. 6th Corps has solid leadership. Stay together, do what your officers tell you, and most of you will make it through." Most, not all. The word hangs in the air. "Any of you boys know how to play poker?" Reeves asks, changing the subject. None of you do, but he teaches you the basics using pebbles for chips. For an hour, you forget your aching feet and the long march ahead as you learn flushes and straights and full houses. Reeves wins most hands, but lets each of you take a victory too. As the game winds down, he becomes reflective. "Been at this 2 years now," he says, shuffling the worn cards with practiced ease. "Seen things I hope you boys never do. But I'll tell you this, it ain't the Rebs you need to fear most out here." "What then?" asks William. "Yourself!" Reeves says simply. Fear will kill you faster than any bullet. Man gets scared enough, he freezes up or he runs. Either way, he's done for. He deals another hand, then continues. But there's something worse than fear out here. You wait for him to continue, not sure you want to hear it. Indifference, he says. Seen it happen to good men. They stop caring, stop seeing the dead as people, start thinking of everything as just something to get through. He taps the deck. That's when you lose something you don't get back. The conversation turns sombre after that. Reeves bids you good night, promising to look for you when the dance starts, as he puts it. Sleep comes quickly, despite the hard ground. Your body is too exhausted to care about comfort, but sometime in the dead of night you wake suddenly, unsure why. Then you hear it, screaming. Not battle cries or calls for help, but the terrible sound of a man trapped in his own mind. Night terrors, William whispers beside you. My uncle got 'em after the Mex War. Somewhere in the vast encampment, a soldier is reliving horrors in his sleep. The screams eventually stop, but sleep is harder to find afterward. Dawn arrives with the inevitable bugle. Your body protests every movement, muscles stiff from yesterday's march, but there's no choice. The army moves on with or without you. Breakfast is meagre. The supply wagons are running behind, the quartermaster explains. You divide hardtack and share coffee, everyone getting less than they need. As your company forms up, you notice gaps in the ranks. Some men who started yesterday aren't here today, fallen out, sent to the ambulance wagons, or simply disappeared in the night. Desertion is rarely mentioned, but everyone knows it happens. The second day's march begins like the first, but the pace seems slower. Men are already tired, feet already blistered. The road is crowded now with artillery batteries, supply wagons and cavalry scouts moving back and forth along the column. Around mid-morning, a new sound reaches your ears, a distant rumble like summer thunder, but in a cloudless sky. Artillery, says an older private named Davis. Big guns, 15-20 miles south. A murmur passes through the ranks. Battle, somewhere ahead. The abstract suddenly becomes concrete. Your mouth goes dry despite the water in your canteen. The column presses on, the distant bombardment a constant reminder of your destination. The officers look more serious now, conferring in hushed voices as they ride alongside. By noon, new sights appear along the roadside, evidence that the war has passed this way before. A chimney standing alone, the house it belonged to now ashes and blackened timbers, fields trampled by thousands of boots and hooves, an abandoned cannon, its barrel burst from overuse. "Welcome to Virginia, boys," Wilkins says grimly. You're in the south now, enemy territory, though this part has changed hands so many times it's hard to say who it belongs to anymore. The few civilians you see watch from doorways with expressionless faces, neither welcoming nor hostile, just tired. A mile further, you pass something that stops conversations mid-sentence. A tree beside the road, and from one sturdy branch, a noose. It swings empty in the breeze, but the message is clear. Someone died here, whether deserter, spy, or civilian, impossible to say. The march continues through the afternoon, your feet moving automatically now, mind somewhere far away. You think of home, of your mother's cooking, of the soft bed waiting in a farmhouse hundreds of miles north. The distance feels insurmountable. Late in the day, rain begins to fall, a gentle shower at first, then a steady downpour that soaks through your uniform in minutes. Water drips from your cap into your eyes. Your already blistered feet now squish with each step, the wet leather of your boots rubbing raw skin. When camp is finally made, it's in a muddy field already churned by previous regiments. No fires tonight, the wood is too wet, and smoke might give away positions to enemy scouts. Cold rations, eaten in the rain, huddled under whatever shelter you can find. Your tent, pitched hastily in the downpour, leaks from a dozen places. You, Wilkins, and William sit in miserable silence, water pooling around your legs, too wet and tired to even complain. "My sister got married last Sunday," William says suddenly, staring at nothing. "Wrote me about it last month, said she wished I could be there to see it." The random statement hangs in the damp air, a reminder of the normal lives continuing elsewhere, oblivious to your current misery. "My girl's probably walking out with Jimmy Porter by now," Wilkins adds. "Told her not to wait, but she promised she would." You think of your own family, wondering what they're doing at this moment. Sitting down to dinner, perhaps. Your empty chair at the table, your father saying grace, maybe asking God to watch over his son. "Why'd you join up?" you ask Wilkins, realising you've never discussed it. He's quite so long, you think he hasn't heard. Finally, "Factory where I worked shut down. Army pays regular, at least." A pause. "You?" The truth is complicated. Patriotism, yes. Adventure, certainly. But mostly because everyone expected it, because saying no seemed harder than saying yes. "Seemed like the right thing," is all you say. William nods, as if this makes perfect sense. "My older brother died at Antietam," he says softly. "Felt like I owed it to him." The rain drums on the canvas above. Somewhere in the vast camp, a harmonica plays a melancholy tune that seems to capture everything you're feeling. Sleep comes in fits and starts, your body too uncomfortable for true rest. Twice you wake to roll away from water dripping directly on your face. Morning arrives grey and drizzly. The march resumes, somehow even more miserable than before. The mud is deeper, the fatigue more profound, the muscles more sore. But something new enters the equation today. Anticipation. The artillery sounds are closer now, no longer distant rumbles but distinct booms that occasionally shake the ground. Cavalry couriers gallop past the column with increasing frequency, carrying dispatches to and from the front. You're close now, close to whatever awaits. Around midday, the column halts more permanently than the usual short breaks. Officers ride back and forth, conferring and pointing. The men use the opportunity to rest, though the air of tension prevents true relaxation. "What's happening?" William asks, though none of you have answers. An hour passes before Captain Hayes approaches your company. His uniform is mud-splattered, but his voice is steady. "We'll be making camp here," he announces. "The main Union army is deployed 3 miles ahead. We join them tomorrow morning." The news sweeps through the ranks like wildfire. Tomorrow you might see battle. As tents are raised and fires lit, rumours fly faster than cavalry scouts. The Confederate army is just beyond that ridge. No, they're retreating toward Richmond. Lee himself is commanding the Southern forces. No, he's miles away. The fighting will be minimal. No, it will be the biggest battle of the war. In this storm of speculation, Sergeant Reeves appears at your campfire again. He looks different today. Alert, focused, his cavalry uniform crisp despite the conditions. "Thought I'd find you boys here," he says, declining coffee this time. "Wanted to check in before tomorrow." "What's really happening?" Wilkins asks directly. Reeves glances around, then lowers his voice. "Confederate forces are dug in along a creek about 4 miles south. Good defensive position. Our boys have been probing their lines since yesterday, looking for weakness. Will we attack, you ask, your mouth suddenly dry. Or be attacked, Reeves says with a shrug. That's for the generals to decide. Either way, your regiment will likely see action. He stands to leave, then hesitates. Listen, he says, looking at each of you in turn. First time under fire there's no preparing for it. Just remember your training. Load, aim, fire, load, aim, fire. Don't think beyond that. As darkness falls, an unusual quiet settles over the camp. Men write letters home by firelight, clean their weapons for the dozenth time, or simply sit in contemplation. A chaplain moves among the companies, offering prayers and communion to those who want it. You find yourself unable to write the letter you've been composing in your head all day. What do you say when tomorrow might be your last day on Earth? What words can possibly bridge that gap? In the end, you write simply, "Dear Ma and Pa, we've marched to Virginia. I'm well. Don't worry. I'll write again when I can. Your loving son, Thomas." It feels inadequate, but it will have to do. You seal the envelope and give it to the company mail orderly, who promises to send it north with the next courier. The night deepens. Fires burn low. Around one nearby, a group of veterans from another regiment are sharing stories, not of battles, as you might expect, but of strange occurrences and superstitions. "Swear on my mother's Bible," one bearded soldier is saying as you approach their circle. "Saw a man at Fredericksburg take 7 bullets, center mass, and walk away without a scratch. Had a Bible in his breast pocket, stopped the first one, and the rest just went around him somehow." Another veteran snorts. "That's nothing. We had a fella in our company, night before Antietam, dreamed he saw his own grave with his name on it. Next day, first volley, bullet right through the heart." You listen, both fascinated and disturbed. These are the tales of the war that don't make it into newspapers or official reports. "You know what keeps you alive out there?" asks a third soldier, a sergeant with an empty sleeve pinned up. "Not luck, not skill. It's having something to live for. Man wants to see home again bad enough. Somehow the bullets miss him. Or having something worth dying for," adds another quietly. You return to your own fire thoughtful. Wilkins is cleaning his rifle again, though it's already immaculate. Williams stares into the flames, saying nothing. None of you mentions tomorrow. As you settle onto your bedroll for what might be your last peaceful night, you find yourself hyper-aware of everything. The scratch of wool blankets, distant laughter from another campfire, the occasional whinny of horses. Life, in all its messy detail, suddenly precious. Sleep, when it finally comes, is surprisingly deep. Your exhausted body overrides your anxious mind, and in the black hours before dawn, the bugle calls you to what waits ahead. The bugle tears through darkness, jerking you from sleep. For a moment, disorientation grips you. Where are you? Then reality crashes back. Virginia, the army. Today, around you, the camp erupts into activity. Men stumbling from tents, officers shouting orders, the clatter of equipment being gathered in the pre-dawn gloom. No time for proper breakfast, just hardtack stuffed into pockets and cold coffee gulped down between preparations. Captain Hayes moves through the company, his face grim. Full battle gear, 60 rounds of ammunition per man. Fill your canteens completely. Your hands shake slightly as you prepare. Loading your cartridge box feels different today. Each paper-wrapped bullet might soon be fired at another human being, or might save your life. The weight of your equipment, normally annoying, now feels reassuring, especially the bayonet. As the eastern sky lightens to grey, your regiment forms up with the others of your brigade. No drums this morning, no bands playing, just thousands of men standing silently in formation, breath fogging in the cool air. Colonel Montgomery, your regimental commander, rides to the front. Even from your position in the ranks, you can see his face is deadly serious. "All men of the 140th Pennsylvania," his voice carries over the quiet ranks. "Today we join the Army of the Potomac in battle against Confederate forces. You will conduct yourselves with courage and discipline. Remember your training. Remember why we fight. For the Union. For freedom." The speech is brief, lacking the fiery patriotism of recruitment rallies. This is different. This is real. The regiment moves out as dawn breaks, marching in column along a narrow country road. After about an hour, you notice a change in the surroundings. Fence rails torn down for firewood, trees splintered by artillery, deep ruts in the road from gun carriages, the signs of armies. Then you hear it. Not the distant rumble of yesterday, but actual gunfire. Sharp cracks of rifles, the heavier boom of artillery. It's still some distance away, but unmistakable now. Wilkins glances at you, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the cool morning. Guess they started without us. No one laughs. Humour feels strange now, out of place. The column quickens its pace. Messages pass up and down the line of officers. Ahead, you can see a ridge where other Union regiments are already deployed. Blue lines against the green hillside. "That's our position," Captain Hayes announces, pointing to an open field near the centre of the ridge. "We're reinforcing the line. As your regiment approaches, the sounds of battle grow louder. You can now distinguish individual volleys, the synchronised crash of hundreds of rifles firing at once. The ground occasionally trembles from artillery. Your mouth is desert dry despite water from your canteen. Your bowels feel loose. Veterans say it happens to everyone before battle, the body preparing to shed weight for flight or fight. Some men stop to relieve themselves at the roadside, ignoring the usual camp modesty. "Jesus," William whispers beside you. "Look at that." Beyond the ridge, smoke hangs over the distant tree line, white puffs from artillery mixed with the darker smoke of rifle fire. Through gaps in the smoke you can see flashes of movement, men advancing, retreating or falling. Colonel Montgomery halts the regiment at the base of the ridge. "Fix bayonets." The sound of steel blades clicking onto 1,500 rifle barrels sends a chill through you. This isn't drill anymore. You climb the ridge in line of battle, shoulder to shoulder with the men of your company, other companies ahead and behind. Every step brings the sounds of conflict closer, louder. At the crest, you get your first clear view of the battlefield below. It's nothing like you imagined. A creek runs through a shallow valley bordered by woods on the far side. Between the ridge where you stand and that creek is open farmland, now torn by shell holes and scattered with dark shapes you realise with horror are bodies. The far woods are shrouded in gun smoke, but you can see flashes of fire within, Confederate positions. Union batteries are positioned along your ridge, the artillerymen working their guns with mechanical precision. Every few seconds, a cannon fires with a deafening boom, adding to the constant crash of sound. Captain Hayes positions your company in a gap between two batteries. "We hold this line," he shouts over the noise. "Fire on command only." You stand in the front rank, rifle gripped so tightly your knuckles are white. Beside you, William's face is pale, his lips moving in what might be prayer. On your other side, Wilkins stares ahead with strange intensity. Minutes pass like hours. The Confederate artillery has the range of your position now. Shells explode on the ridge, showering dirt and deadly fragments. You flinch at each explosion, fighting the urge to duck or run. 100 yards to your right, a shell lands directly on a gun crew. The explosion lifts one man completely off his feet, throwing him yards away. Another crumples instantly. The survivors continue loading their cannon as if nothing happened. "Get ready," Captain Hayes shouts. Through the smoke in the valley, you see movement. A line of grey, Confederate infantry advancing across the open ground toward your position. Their battle flags flutter above them. Even at this distance, you can see bayonets gleaming. Colonel Montgomery rides behind your line. "Steady, boys. Hold your fire." The grey line advances steadily despite artillery tearing gaps in their ranks. They're within rifle range now, but still no order comes to fire. The waiting is its own kind of torture. The command finally comes when the Confederates are about 300 yards away. You raise your rifle, trying to steady it against your shoulder as you've practiced. But this is different from shooting at targets. These are men coming toward you, intent on killing you if they can. Fire. 1,500 rifles discharge as one. The noise is like physical force punching through your ears. The recoil slams your rifle butt against your shoulder. Smoke envelops the line, so thick you can hardly see. Through breaks in the smoke, you glimpse the effect of your volley. The Confederate line staggers, dozens of men falling, but they don't break. They continue advancing, and now they're returning fire. Bullets whip past with angry buzzing sounds. Some strike the ground, kicking up dirt. Others hit with the sickening thud of lead striking flesh. The man 2 spaces to your left jerks backward, a dark hole appearing in his forehead. He drops without a sound, dead weight. Load, Captain Hayes orders. Your training takes over. Bite cartridge, pour powder, ram bullet, place cap. Each motion practiced hundreds of times, now performed with desperate urgency. Aim fire. Another volley, another shock of noise and smoke. The rhythm continues. Load, aim, fire, load, aim, fire. As if time has compressed into just these 3 actions. Your world narrows to the rifle in your hands, the choking smoke around you, the grey line still advancing despite your fire. You lose track of how many volleys you've fired. Your shoulder aches from the rifle's recoil. Your ears ring so badly you can barely hear commands, following the actions of men beside you instead. The Confederate line has closed to about 100 yards, close enough to see faces beneath the hats, to distinguish officers from enlisted men. Someone screams to your right, not the scream of fear, but the higher, more terrible sound of agony. You don't look, can't look. Keep loading, keep firing. A new sound cuts through the chaos. The rebel yell. The Confederate line surges forward at a run, their high-pitched battle cry sending ice through your veins. "Stand firm," Colonel Montgomery shouts, riding behind your line. "Repel them with cold steel if—" His words cut off as a bullet strikes him. He slumps forward over his horse's neck, then falls heavily to the ground. The horse bolts. The Confederate charge reaches the bottom of the ridge and starts up the slope. They're only 50 yards away now, running hard despite their casualties. Captain Hayes draws his sword. Prepare to receive charge. You grip your rifle with bayonet fixed, heart hammering against your ribs. They're going to reach your line. This will be hand to hand. But then, movement to your left. Fresh Union troops arriving at a run, thousands of them, forming quickly into battle line. Their artillery unlimbers on a small rise, the crews working with frantic energy. A new thunder joins the cacophony as these guns open fire on the Confederate flank. The effect is devastating. Entire sections of the grey line disappear in explosions of dirt and smoke. The Confederate charge falters, then stops. For a moment, the battleground becomes a tableau. Blue and grey lines facing each other across a shrinking gap, the air between filled with smoke and death. Then the grey line breaks. Not all at once, but man by man, squad by squad, they begin falling back toward the creek. Their retreat quickly becomes general. Fire, pour it into them, Captain Hayes orders. You find yourself firing mechanically, reloading and firing again without conscious thought. The smoke is so thick you can barely see your targets. You're not sure if you're hitting anything, not sure if you want to. The Confederate retreat becomes a rout, men running, dropping equipment to move faster. Union artillery continues firing into their backs as they flee toward the creek and the woods beyond, and then sudden silence. Not complete, moans of the wounded rise from the field. Officers still shout commands, but the constant crash of battle subsides. You stand panting, ears ringing, surrounded by smoke that slowly drifts away on the breeze. Your rifle barrel is too hot to touch. Your mouth tastes of gunpowder. Your uniform is soaked with sweat and black with powder residue. They're running, Wilkins shouts, voice cracking with emotion. We beat them. But there's no jubilation in the line. Just exhaustion and stunned silence as reality begins to register. Men looking around, counting who's missing. William stands beside you, pale but intact. Did you see the colonel go down? He asks, shakily. You nod, unable to form words yet. The image of Colonel Montgomery falling from his horse seems branded into your vision. Captain Hayes moves along the line, checking casualties. Your company has been lucky. Only 3 dead, a dozen wounded. Others fared worse. The company to your right lost over half its men. Get water and ammunition, the captain orders. This isn't over. He's right. In the distance, Confederate artillery still fires occasionally. Their infantry has retreated, but they're regrouping beyond the creek. This was just one engagement in what might be days of battle. The wounded are carried to the rear, where field hospitals have been established in farmhouses and barns. The dead are laid in rows, awaiting burial details. You help carry one of your company, a man named Ellis, who you barely knew, placing him gently beside others in blue uniforms. Hours pass in a strange blur. You help distribute ammunition, carry water to the artillery crews, build hasty breastworks along the ridge using fence rails and dirt, anything to stay busy to avoid thinking about what just happened, what might happen next. Late afternoon finds you sitting with Wilkins and William in the shelter of a stone wall. You're eating salt pork and hardtack, though none of you has much appetite. The food sticks in your throat, but you force it down, knowing you need strength. I never fired a gun at a living thing before today, William says quietly. Not even a rabbit? Wilkins nods. I kept imagining they were targets, like at drill. He pauses. Except targets don't scream when they fall. You say nothing. What is there to say? You're all trying to process experience.